Was Margaret Thatcher a secret communist? Was the Reds in the bed scare a red herring? Thatcher, she who led the UK through tumultuous political strife and economic upheaval, the darling of neoliberal capitalism, incapable of changing her mind, no matter how much damage she did, her steely, patriarchal resolve forcing unemployment to rise higher than it had been since the 1930s Great Depression, caused by unrestrained capitalism, a loudmouth, whiskey-swilling anti-communist with an extremist ideology, a dark seed to plant in the ashes of Britain's immolated heart, a fast-growing, invasive, utilitarian vacuum, an insatiable infant called growth, its gaping discorporate mouth demanding to be fed for all eternity. But what if her outward hatred served to mask a secret ambition? What if she was a red wolf in a blue wolf's clothing? Untenable. Forget your cultivated propagandized perception for a moment. Let's have a look at the evidence. The politics of fear. As leader of the Conservatives, Thatcher networked with like-minded cronies who controlled the British press. With the promise of deregulation and economic favours, they helped the Iron Lady stir up fear of the enemy within, people protesting against unchosen poverty and inflation-eroded income. They weren't worried about being able to pay the rent or afford milk for their children. They were well-armed, organised communists working with the Ruskies, intent on a militant coup. Those who remembered the broken promises of decades earlier embrace automation and get more holidays and leisure time, perhaps 2 or 3 day working weeks. Those people weren't seeking justice for a duped generation. They were crazed, wild-eyed mobs who wanted to demolish the entire country just for kicks. Such anti-socialist rhetoric was wielded like an axe, cracking through the British skull, killing all doubt about her political aims. She was on the right, in the right, fighting virtuously against those leftist commie devils, or was she? The herd, shepherded by tabloids and state television, never learned much about the hidden Thatcher, not just her shady side, like her passion for necrophiles, but her cosy relationship with the Mont Pelerin Society, MPS, an organisation that could make even the most ardent conspiracy theorist gasp. Its establishment followed a decade of planning and plotting by a loose-knit affiliation of writers, economists and businessmen. Their first official meeting was in 1938 at the Walter Lippmann Colloquium, heralded as the birthplace of neoliberalism. By 1947, the founding year of the MPS, a goal emerged: to infiltrate and influence politics and economic thinking across the board. Full-spectrum dominance, partisan politics was eschewed. Direct and indirect funding came from rich businessmen and highly virtuous industries with enmeshed interests, such as big tobacco and big pharma. They deployed neutral think tanks, released corporate bloodhounds, established schools of thought in universities as cheap button badges of academic credibility. Debate was saturated, funneled. The aim was to discredit any alternative way of seeing the world. Different approaches were used to push the neoliberal agenda across the globe. In Chile, General Pinochet was helped to power via a violent coup that dethroned the nation's democratically elected leader, Allende. He wound up with a bullet in the head. Tens of thousands of Allende's supporters were rounded up, imprisoned, raped, and tortured. Many disappeared, their corpses strapped to iron and dropped from helicopters over the Pacific Ocean. A less medieval approach was used in Britain. They had Thatcher, a woman who'd been pottering around in politics for decades. She was groomed by MPS affiliates from the 1950s. Then, In the orchestrated chaos of the 1970s, their carefully propagated shoot began to form an apical bud, a thorned bloom, globalis hegemonicus neoliberalis. To make way for the new cultivar, the economic field of Britain was ploughed, all excess growth burnt off. When the smoke cleared, to the surprise of many, Thatcher stood tall, ready to be transplanted into the charred furrows. Her election success was guaranteed by manufactured crises and floods of fawning froth from Fleet Street. Injected with political growth hormones, the industrially farmed monocrop invaded every back garden, village green, and croquet lawn. Its foliage masked an illegal tyranny. Covert industry blacklists, MI5, and secret police deployed to debase politicians and grassroots groups. Battalions of police using militarized tactics to violently ambush protesters and strikers. In the shadows, a neoliberal smirk. Decades of planning and propaganda finally brought to fruition. Well, that would be the simple view. Always think further ahead than your opponent. Let's ditch gardening for a moment and take up chess. Thatcher's ideological prophet, Hayek, was taught by Ludwig von Mises, a man who proudly worked as economic advisor to Austrian fascist Engelbert Dollfuss. Dollfuss was unwanted competition for arsehole of the century, so Hitler's boys bumped him off. Anyway, Hayek, who founded the MPS, went on to teach at Chicago University, laying the groundwork for the emergence of Chicago School of Economics 2.0. Now, anybody who has actually studied economics will have read Marx, not a few cruddy pages of the Communist Manifesto like the intellectually challenged Jordan Peterson, but Marx's full academic work, for example, Das Kapital. Undistracted by TikTok videos or satellite TV, Marx grafted over decades, churning out thousands of pages of the most insightful and intelligent economic thought ever published. Had he spent a little more time contemplating Darwin, he might not have bothered, instead choosing to take up a comfortable room in an insane asylum to escape the idiotic cruelty of the masses, as Nietzsche did, following his equine-induced satori. But I digress. In the Chicago School, there were numerous thinkers who hadn't just read and understood Marx, they'd also digested his thinking along with more contemporary supplements, psychology, sociology, corporate media. With the benefit of hindsight from 2 world wars, they will have forecast the long-term outcome of unrestrained capitalism. An unfettered capitalist system would feast on the flesh of the minions obsessively, repeatedly, picking over the bones to ensure every consumable portion had been devoured. Eventually, the masses would have nothing left but debt and industrial excrement to show for their efforts. The mess and chaos would be global, widespread, and undeniable. People would become ungovernable. Sheer brutality would not contain them, death being little loss to the negative lives they inhabited. For a period, lost ideologies would re-emerge. Religious extremism, corporate fascism, astrological spiritualism, tribal mafias, and blinkered nostalgia. But that would only lead to increased cognitive division. Violent tragedy would become endemic, followed by a worldwide conflagration that threatened the very existence of the most unwise of all apes. From the ruins, there could be only one outcome: a centralized, secular, planned economy, its population subject to strict rationing of resources, awash with surveillance and behavioral adjustment. Global communism, but not the communal, anarchistic kind. In the 1970s, hostility to Marxist thought was widespread. especially within the newly stupefied masses, engorged on cheap booze and mesmerized by televised sports and soap operas. Decades-long campaigns that hot-branded anything remotely socialist as demonic and undemocratic made approaching rational debate impossible. So, it would have been prudent for exponents of communism to be discreet about their true affiliations. Instead, they may have looked a half-century ahead, perhaps more than a dozen moves on the political chessboard. Communism in Russia was obviously going to fail, falling into the jaws of capitalism. What was needed was a way of maintaining a popular communism while allowing capitalism to do its thing and eat its tail. With a little encouragement, the process could be accelerated. The answer was obvious: China. The Red Dragon rises. 1978, the year before Thatcher's inauguration, China's GDP was a mere $149.5 billion, 1.7% of the global economy. Then, influenced by academic pollination with the Chicago School, the nation decides to ditch its Maoist wardrobe and try on some capitalist threads. Bling! In comes marketization and foreign investment, a tasty carrot for the capitalist donkey. And what timing! The reward for such a move? Hong Kong, a seat with the WTO cabal, backdoor access to global internet and telecommunications tech, including mobiles used by glib Tory cabinet members, and a flag on the moon. Fast forward to 2023, China's GDP has skyrocketed to $17.8 trillion, openly claiming 16.9% of the global economy. Under state-supervised economic plans, the Chinese economy achieved constant growth without recession for almost 50 years. It has the largest army in the world, now a well-equipped military using high-tech weapons. National expansion is a stated aim. For example, occupying Taiwan before 2030, they're building roads and bridges all over the place. Like other foreign states, they own, or part-own, various British industries, from steel to energy production. Meanwhile, in the UK, public sector debt as a proportion of GDP is almost double what it was in 1979. Much worse, private debt has almost tripled and is more than double what it was during the Great Recession. Britain is left scratching its head or punching itself in the face, wondering where it all went wrong. Where did all that North Sea oil money go? Have the Hooray Henrys, created in the 80s, simply conjured up a national debt trap so they could win a Bollinger pissing contest? Perhaps it was the lack of a credible 5-year economic plan. Or maybe just a bad case of tea-induced complacency. It couldn't be anything to do with globalist neoliberal policies based on comparative advantage. That would be ridiculous. Rather than reflect on the long-term effects of their ideology, the British right are throwing their rattle out of the cot, triggered by the removal of a portrait of Thatcher from Downing Street. The image, a tragic icon of the personality cult she represents, oddly commissioned by Labour Prime Minister Gordon Brown, just after he allowed corrupt global corporations to throw the nation into an economic black hole it would never be capable of escaping. It's almost like both major sides in British politics have been aiming the boat in the same direction since, 1979. Weird, eh? Thatcher as great leader. Thatcher's identity politics are an awesome example of the power of propaganda, rivaling Kim Jong-un, Hitler or Mussolini. Sorry, Kim, that wasn't meant as a compliment. Like her true political aims, the movement is brazenly visible, yet hidden from conscious recognition. Members of the Thatcherite personality cult surround themselves with portraits, mugs, statues, and all the other strange phenomena you'd normally associate with religious idolatry or totalitarianism. They celebrate a woman who moralized the economy by increasing inequality, commodification of the human, encouraging greed, flushing the environment down the toilet, sanctifying police corruption and cover-ups, destroying national industry, selling national assets at below market value to make a quick buck, knighting criminals, enabling the City of London to become the money laundering capital of the world, and bigging up pedophiles. Oh, not to mention that little issue with her son, who suddenly came into money during her tenure after shady British arms sales to the wonderful democratic nation of Saudi Arabia. Mark, you know him. He's the one who was convicted of trying to start a military coup in Equatorial Guinea. This ethical doublethink, a mode of worship to Thatcher the Great, was embraced willingly by her fawning followers, much to the envy of many of her dictator friends. A red silk road. Ignoring Starmer, who's barely finished redecorating his office, the only non-Tory British Prime Minister since Thatcher's reign, Blair and Brown were fervent Thatcherites. Brown, who had a proclivity for funny handshakes and who guided Blair's economic policies, was utterly besotted with the woman. So, however her fans try to wriggle out of it, it is an inescapable fact that Thatcher laid out the roadmap that leads to today. Was she a dupe of a hidden global movement, moving in lockstep, or was she complicit? Does it matter? The results of her actions speak for themselves, and the long-term outcome will be known by the minority who survive the next 20 years. Follow the star. The instilled binary of communism/socialism be capitalism belies a hidden truth. There's little difference between them. In both cases, those deemed useless are heartlessly discarded, whether they lack comparative advantage or simply don't fit in with expected norms. They both use the instruments of the state to impose non-democratic rule, either directly or by deregulation, which enables corporate governance. They both make use of prominent and invasive surveillance, and they both use sensationalist distraction and propaganda to control perception. Capitalist society doing a significantly better job. So, perhaps it is no surprise that both political extremes are associated with a common icon, the five-pointed star. In fact, that star gets everywhere. Did you ever notice how ubiquitous it is? From Che to China, from the USA to the EU, from Melusine's revamped coffee crown to skaters' pumps, from the Church of Satan to the collegiate Notre Dame Vitry-la-Françoise. This symbol of man, of Venusian orbits, of wood, fire, earth, metal, and water appears everywhere. It has been leading us throughout known history. It adorned the pots of Babylon and is prominent on the flag of South Sudan, the newest nation on the planet at the time of writing. No doubt, it will feature on the flag of the future government of the New World Order, be it Chinese, American, or some cocktail of associated flavors.